Hi, Kerouac. How you doing? I've got your work up here, and I wanted to address your writing. Uh, bu- 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 okay. In this attempt, I actually used a ruler for my baseline and other letter sizing lines, and I'm okay with that. I know in week one we weren't allowed to use any straight edges, but I'm okay with establishing baseline, mean line, cap line with a ruler or a straight edge because I think that's just that important to establish a good foundation for the rest of the assignment. So I'm okay with that. Now, one thing I would have done is I would have turned this paper uh, the other way. Your words don't fit here, and that's a problem. And I'm going to explain that in a second. Let's go through them. But what I'm going to do here is if you've looked at some of the other video critiques, the first thing I do is I bring students right over to the announcements area. And in Kerouac, I really want you to watch these four, or to view these four announcements. Welcome to week one, how to complete assignment one, how to kern banana on the computer, and welcome to week two. Within these announcements, there's several videos and many tutorials, tips and tricks, caveats, all sorts of resources in there to help you understand letter spacing. And then welcome to week two. I actually go in and I kern fire and ice on the computer just to give you a good idea of how to transition between this kind of manual kerning and letter spacing into doing it on the computer, so we have a good understanding of that transition. Now that said, in that video, how to kern fire and ice on the computer, I've included this file. This to me is kerned perfectly and spaced perfectly. I did this myself, and this is kind of a combination or a compilation of 30 years of typographic experience. So I would consider this to be spaced and kerned perfectly. So we're going to use this in comparison to your piece, and we can make these comparisons. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, the first thing we see, of course, is that you've dropped the word ice to a second line. We don't want that. We want this to fit in one page. And the reason being is because we're very interested in this space right here. So logically, we're not only kerning and letter spacing, but we're word spacing as well. So dropping this word to the second line disregards a word spacing. So in your final iteration, you definitely want to keep this on one line. All right, now as we take a look, I think the first thing we see is that even though you did use a straight edge, some of your baselines aren't level. Let me use the top of this document as a straight edge. I'm going to place it at the bottom of the baseline on the left-hand side, and we can see it clearly goes uphill. Look how much space there is between that. This one's not so much, but there is it's still definitely, actually it is just as much. So these aren't level. It's really important to establish that baseline uh, as being level and then establish the mean line, I'm sorry, the cap line and the mean line based on the height of the lowercase and uppercase letters respectively. And you want to make sure that those are also perfectly level and perfectly parallel to the baseline. All right, so taking a look at your letter forms, I think you're pretty good. We want to pay attention to craft a little bit closer as we have some stray marks coming out from within the confines of those contour lines. Be really careful with your serifs and just watch the shapes of your letters. I think for the most part you're doing pretty good, but a little bit shaky here through here. I want to get those curves to be perfect. Okay, fire. Let's look at word spacing and letter spacing. So letter spacing, I think this is too wide. Let's move that I a little closer to the F. This is perfect here. And let's move that E a little closer to the R. I think and is kerned very nicely through the first part, but this space right here is a little bit wide. And again, you can use this as your guide. Feel free to take a screenshot of this and use it as your guide for your second iteration. But yeah, that's a little close. And then ice is just, it's the space between the C and the E is okay. Watch that comes down to more of a curve. You have that straight right there. That tail of the C just kind of abruptly ends. And so does the E. So you want to kind of mimic those kind of curved little tails right there. The space between the I and the C is too great. You want to move that in a little bit as seen right here. Now, what you want to do with your word spacing is this, is you want it to be natural, okay, as we see here, but watch this space right here. This is problematic. It's going to end up being too wide if you don't pay attention. And the reason is because if you make this space equal to this space is going to seem wider because of these open counters. This was covered during week 1 and in week 2 of resources, but those open counters create more surface area, adding this illusion that this space is greater than this space if they're equal. For that reason, you want to make the proper adjustments to make sure that this space doesn't appear to be greater than the space between and ice. Okay, all right, so those are my recommendations. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if I can provide any further clarifications, please let me know. I'll be glad to do so. Great start, but I'd like to see those recommendations reflected in your final submission coming up this Sunday. And of course, please don't forget about all those resources and announcements. All right, good start. Thanks so much for sharing.